Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are looking at a year that completely, and I mean completely, altered the course of Western history. If you've ever found yourself wondering why English is such a ridiculously confusing language to learn, well, the answer starts right here. Forget those dusty, boring history books you read in school. The story of 1066 is actually a high-stakes, fast-paced political thriller. It's this incredible tale of invasion, betrayal, incredibly small margins of victory, and a literal cultural earthquake that forged the language, the laws, and the very nation of England as we know it today. Okay, let's dive into this. We're dropping right into a massive crisis in early January, 1066. King Edward the Confessor, who's this pious ruler that's governed England for over 2 decades, is on his deathbed. And here's the kicker, he has no children. Now, in a hereditary monarchy, a king dying without a clear heir is basically a recipe for absolute disaster. It throws the doors wide open to civil war, rebellion, and foreign intervention. So when Edward draws his last breath on January 5th, the English throne is just suddenly empty. It creates this massive vacuum of power, and there are 3 very dangerous men who are more than eager to fill it. So, part 1. The throne left empty. The English Noble Council, a group known as the Witan, realizes they have to act desperately fast to prevent utter chaos from just swallowing the kingdom whole. They really don't have the luxury of a long debate here. Literally the very next day, January 6th, the exact same day King Edward is buried in his newly built Westminster Abbey, the Witan crowns Harold Godwinson as King of England. Now, Harold was already the most powerful nobleman in the country. He was the Earl of Wessex, and honestly, he practically ran the government in Edward's final years anyway. This lightning-fast coronation was politically necessary to secure the kingdom and deter invaders. But by placing the crown on Harold's head so quickly, it immediately enraged 2 incredibly powerful rivals across the sea who felt that throne was rightfully theirs. Which brings us to Section 2, 3 men, 1 crown. The struggle for England really begins here. It creates a geopolitical standoff of epic proportions with immense narrative tension, mostly because you have 3 massive military powers all converging on a single island. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the logic behind the standoff becomes super clear when you look at it. Each of these 3 men felt completely 100% justified to rule. You've got Harold Godwinson, who had the backing of the English nobles and claimed Edward named him on his deathbed. Then, across the channel, Duke William of Normandy claimed Edward had promised him the throne years earlier. And way up north, King Harald Hardrada of Norway, who is basically the most terrifying warrior of his age, he believed old Scandinavian agreements gave him the right to rule. So 3 men, 1 crown, and absolutely no one is backing down. But Duke William of Normandy had a problem. He needed to convince his knights to actually cross the sea, so he executes this brilliant PR maneuver. He claimed that years prior, Harold Godwinson had sworn a solemn oath on holy relics to support William's claim to the throne. It's a moment famously depicted in the Bayeux Tapestry. By framing Harold as a perjurer and an oath breaker, William actually managed to secure a sacred banner from the Pope himself. He successfully transformed what was essentially a dynastic land grab into a holy cause, which convinced thousands of men to join his invasion fleet. But as William prepares, we enter Section 3, the Viking threat. Because right around this time, in April 1066, Halley's Comet blazes across the sky. To the people back then, this wasn't just some cool astronomical wonder, they viewed it as a terrifying warning from God of approaching disaster. And man, that disaster came from a completely unexpected direction. See, while Harold is intensely watching the southern coast waiting for William to show up, a massive threat lands in the north. King Harold's own brother, Tostig, who had been exiled, forms a deadly alliance with the Norwegian king, Harald Hardrada. They arrive with a massive Viking fleet, taking the English completely by surprise. In September, they absolutely devastate the northern English army at the Battle of Fulford, leaving the great city of York totally exposed. When King Harold gets word of this down in London, he doesn't hesitate for a second. He launches his army on this impossible, lightning-fast 200-mile march north, covering the distance in just a few days. I mean, imagine running a multi-day ultra-marathon, but you and all your friends are wearing 30 pounds of medieval chainmail. It's brutal. But he actually manages to catch the Viking army completely off guard at Stamford Bridge. Right before the battle, Tostig asks what his brother would give Harald Hardrada for his troubles. And King Harold's messenger delivers this legendary icy reply, 7 feet of English ground, or a little more since he is taller than most men. The Battle of Stamford Bridge ends up being a total bloodbath, but it's a complete English victory. Both Harald Hardrada and Tostig are slain on the battlefield. and the absolute devastation of the Viking fleet can be summed up by a single, staggering number. Out of roughly 240 invading ships that arrived to conquer England, only about 24 were needed to carry the defeated survivors home. Think about that for a second. It effectively ended the Viking Age in Britain for good. Which brings us to Section 4, the Southern Crisis, the climax. History is full of these cruel twists of fate. Just as Harold and his totally exhausted men are celebrating their epic victory up in the north, the wind in the English Channel, which had actually trapped the Normans in France for weeks, finally changes direction. On September 28th, William of Normandy lands totally unopposed on the southern coast of England. And this brilliantly illustrates the agonizing geographical whiplash of this campaign. Harold is forced to instantly turn his battered, bleeding forces around and march another 200 miles back south to London and then even further down to Sussex. Within just a few weeks, these poor men have to fight two of the greatest armies in Europe at opposite ends of the country. On October 14th, the two armies finally clash at Senlac Ridge in the Battle of Hastings. It's this incredible contrast of two drastically different military styles. You have the immovable English shield wall, these highly disciplined infantry packed tightly together on the high ground, wielding heavy axes. Against them is the highly mobile Norman army, featuring archers and quite literally the finest mounted knights in Europe. For hours, William's cavalry charges repeatedly shatter against the English shield wall. The lines simply will not break. As direct charges fail, William is forced into some pretty deadly mid-battle tactical adaptations. First, the Normans execute these feigned retreats, basically pretending to flee and panic. The English soldiers break their disciplined formation to chase them down the hill, where they are quickly surrounded and destroyed by the Norman cavalry. Then, William orders his archers to aim high, dropping arrows vertically over the shields. Naturally, men instinctively raise their shields to protect their heads, but that exposes their bodies. With the wall finally showing gaps, William launches a final devastating cavalry charge. As evening approaches, the exhausted English defense is systematically dismantled. The line collapses, King Harold Godwinson is killed on the battlefield, and without their king, the remaining English forces just scatter into the night. It is a complete, decisive Norman victory. From the bloody slopes of Hastings, William begins his brutal, methodical march toward London to claim his prize. Finally, we reach Section 5, the Norman legacy. On Christmas Day 1066, inside Westminster Abbey, William the Conqueror is crowned King of England. But as you'll see, winning the battlefield was really only the beginning. What followed was a long-term cultural earthquake that completely transformed the nation from the ground up. So the crucial point is that this single conquest had massive, permanent butterfly effects on society. William overhauled the entire government by instituting strict feudal land ownership, meaning suddenly all land literally belonged to the crown. He dotted the landscape with these imposing stone castles designed specifically to intimidate and control the population. Plus, the Norman elite brought their French language with them, which blended with Old English over the centuries to create the modern English we're speaking right now. To truly cement his power, William commissioned the Domesday Book. This was the ultimate tool of Norman administration. It was this incredibly thorough, totally unprecedented survey of literally every village, field, and farm animal in the kingdom. It fundamentally reorganized the kingdom's wealth, allowing William to extract maximum taxation. It proved that he wasn't just a conqueror with a sword. He was a master administrator who brought the entire country under his absolute control. It leaves us with a truly provocative thought to end on. What if the wind in the English Channel had blown south just a few weeks earlier? William might have landed while Harold's army was fresh, rested, and waiting right there on the coast. The Norman invasion could have been easily crushed on the beaches. Instead, incredibly small margins, just the shifting of the wind, or an arrow fired high into a shield wall, forged the language, the history, and the very nation of England as we know it today. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope it leaves you eager to uncover more of history's turning points.